All right, so what I did is I created a little preliminary drawing. So this was my reference photo right here. I chose to focus on this tree. It's a little bit far away, so I won't get into much detail. So then here I have my underdrawing. And if you create an underdrawing, I recommend you use a fairly hard pencil. So see if the camera will pick this up. No, it doesn't want to refocus. It's basically just an H pencil. Don't go any softer than that because it will for this one. Usually I begin with the ink line work, but for now I'm beginning with the value and when I'm using the Inktense. And I don't know where my gray Inktense pencil is, so this one is red. Doesn't matter, it's just for the value. Okay, so think of this as just a regular graphite pencil that you would create value with. So I already have my parameters. So for now, I'm creating one layer of just the local value. So remember, the local value is just the overall significant sky holes in the foliage. Make sure you reserve those out. So you don't want to mindlessly put a ton of the Inktense down and then later realize, oh shoot, I needed to have a shape here for the sky peeking through. You don't want to go. I prefer to retain some control by layering. So going one light layer and then letting it dry and then doing another light value. So the characteristic of this tree is on the shapes that separate out. Like, yes, you want to look at the big shape of the tree, but also like what subsegments separate out from the big shape. And then, of course, but that's something I'm paying more attention to later on, what does the edge quality, the textural edge quality of these shapes look like? Okay, so I'm thinking, talking to myself here, this hole I need to retain open, this hole I need to retain open. So it's such a nice thought to just mindlessly draw. And I think there is a time and place for that. But if you're trying to create a real good sketch for something, that'd be so fun in terms of, okay, what kind of shape is this? And what did I need to make sure I do? And what's my next step? So it's like driving a car. I always come back to this driving a car reference because it's so useful. Because you don't want to fall asleep on the wheel. Yes, after a while, certain things become automatic, but you definitely don't want to fall asleep or drift into so much of a dream state that you miss your exit or whatever. I mean, you can go on adventures like that and then see where you end up, but sometimes you might not end up where you want to end up. This tree isn't red, but we're just gonna pretend like it's a green or a gray, or, you know, who says pencils have to be black? Okay, so then you grab your water brush. I prefer the Kuretake brand just because you can, this is a Pentel. They're cheaper, I think, but they suck because they really just let the water gush out. Not a big fan of that. This one, I'm squeezing a little bit. If you have a paper towel, that might be useful. I don't have one right now. Have a paper towel in your lap and then squeeze out until a drop of water comes out. You don't want to have tons of water dripping out. And then start to dilute this. Well, hello. Yes. Should have thought of that earlier. And whenever I do ink sketches, and I mentioned that before, I always have a part of the paper, like either down here or down there, or even a separate piece of paper that I use for testing. Testing if my value is good, testing if the water flow is good, because you don't want to like get into your sketch and the sketch has been going good, and all of a sudden you have this massive gush of water coming out, or this massive blob of ink, and like it kind of undoes the plan, or undoes? It undoes. It undoes the plan you had for your sketch. So you see, it just kind of dilutes, the water kind of dilutes, thins out. So this is where, but if this was something I recorded, I would do like a time lapse here so you don't have to sit through. Dilute, dilute, dilute. So I don't know if you noticed, the less water I have coming through the tip of my brush, and the more I've been working on this, the more pigment gets stuck on the tip of your brush. And so you get a darker tone. Okay, so the trunk of this tree is fairly light, something I'm noticing just now, just making a note to myself. You know what? Might as well add a tone for the ground here. I'm going to ignore the hillside. Well, actually, you know what? Because you guys will be having a landscape later on in your assignment. Let me do it. And once this dries, so once or while it is wet, you can push the pigment around. But once it's dry, it's in the paper. Like you can't pick it back out anymore. So local value of that backdrops. Again, how do you tell the local value? You find the edge, let your eye hop back and forth. The sky is lighter, the hillside is darker. Try to get rid of any color words in your thinking. Like don't think, oh, it's brown, it's tan, because there are assumptions connected to that. If you really can't tell, put the picture in black and white mode so you can tell better. Or if you have colored sunglasses or a colored piece of acetate, you can buy those in the art store. Red is a really good color to use for that. Then look through that red piece of acetate that you put over it. Everything becomes red, and you can tell very easily what is light and what is dark. Okay, so at this point, I have my silhouette for the tree. It's characteristic of what I was hoping to capture. I have my local values, like the pigmentation, local values of the surrounding. So now my next step, if this wasn't a live video, is I would wait for this to dry and then search out my shadow patterns. So you see in here, there are these darker little puzzle pieces in here, in here, in here. I would layer those over here to get a sense of depth, a sense of three-dimensionality through putting those shadow patterns over it. But this is still wet, and I don't have a hairdryer near me. So I recommend using the time better. And so I'm going to switch into my line tool. So line tools, you can use traditional ink nib. I kind of have a hankering to try my brush pen. Love this one. This is a Sumiro thin liner. So it's actually hair that the ink comes through. And I don't know how it's going to react with it going on a slightly damp surface, but I guess we'll find out. And I'm now going around the outer edges, creating a little bit of a textural shorthand that will imply, hey, foliage. And since this is a red ink, it might have been nicer if I had like a brown liner, but I don't. So I'm just going to use what I have and see if it works out. And I mean, you know, at its best, that's what sketching is. Like, it's not to produce like a fancy piece of artwork that you can impress people with. Like, at its best, sketching happens if I paint this way. See what happens if I paint that way. And I mean, for us, like, see what happens if you combine this kind of a liner with that kind of a wash. And it might crash and burn, or it might turn out really surprisingly beautiful. But if you're so stuck on having to produce something that will allow you to put the label artist on yourself, then you might not get to have that artistic adventure. And you know, that's the thing about having a sketchbook. It's like your journal. You don't have to show it to anybody. If the drawings in it suck, nobody knows. Yeah, like, I mean, you know, I'm not having my friends read my diary, my journal. That's my private stuff. And if I do choose to share something, I share the ones that I'm happy with, you know. So notice as I'm creating these kind of linear accents, I'm not creating a line that's continuous. It's broken. Otherwise, you won't get that airy feel of a tree. Hill behind it. Not really in the photo, but that's how it'll look like in my drawing. So I'm not only creating the line work for the like the edges of your foliage clusters. So every branch has a cluster of leaves coming off of it, and that cluster creates its own little pillow shape. And that's something in key areas, like in areas where it's pronounced and significant, I'll pull those out. But up here, I wouldn't. Like, if you can tell here, that visually kind of blends in, like they're not really any big shapes that I'd want to pull out. Okay. Okay, let's get the cast shadow. So light's coming from the right. The camera's mirrored, so I'm not sure how it'll end up in the real result if you see it mirrored or not. So it's coming from this side, and so the shadow's going that way. Let's just say it like this. So it's casting the shadow like that. I'm not going to outline the landscape because I want the landscape to sit back in space. And if I put a line around it, it'll bring it forward again. So now it should be dry enough. So now I'm getting back in here and adjust some values some more. So And this is where it really is like a pencil. You kind of push a little bit harder, you layer back over it, it gets darker. And for this little trick, I blur my vision. So if you wear glasses, you just take those glasses off and draw the shapes that you see. And the beautiful thing about trees is it's not like drawing a person. It's so much more forgiving. If you mess up those facial proportions, it's not going to look like a person anymore. It's going to look like you're trying to make a person, but the viewers, your audience, you're not going to be as forgiving. So that's why trees are, some of these darker, there's a separation happening. Like this is coming forward, this is moving back. So again, I blur my vision and I capture the dark puzzle piece like shapes and put them in there. Okay. And I talk to myself as I do this. So this is dark, just to stay organized. So here's some little dark pockets in there. There. Okay. Gonna make this foreground darker than the background hill. So there's this thing called atmospheric perspective. Means that as things move away from us, color-wise or value-wise, they get lighter. They also get more neutral. In this, like photos, how to say this? In photos, it's often not so clear, but it's really clear in real life. But yeah, so as things go away from us, color-wise, they get lighter, they get more neutral in color, and depending on the weather conditions, it might be more brownish, it might be more bluish. Like if there's lots of rain, or not, like if there's a lot of moisture in the air, it'll be bluish. If it's very dry and like lots of dust is in the air, it'll be more brownish. Okay, so I added my second layer of Inktense. I'm getting my water brush, trying to get a water droplet going. Make sure I wipe off the excess. And then I get back in here. And at the second phase, when I'm interested in retaining the shapes of my shadows, I really want to make sure that I have a fairly dry tip. Because I don't want to drag this everywhere. I just kind of want to dilute it so it feels like it's part of the values from earlier. So sun, they have the shadow. The tops of the foliage pillows, they have the light. Just kind of stay organized like that. Okay. All right, so what this tree is like, and if my focus was to capture the shape, to capture a little bit of the value, get a little bit of space indicated, then that might be a good way to go. So this was like a 20-minute little sketch using that Derwent Inktense. And you can always, and like sometimes when it's wet, you can even draw into the wetness and work it like that. You can keep coming back to your liner and say, you know what, I really wanted to have a little bit more texture, maybe in here. I wanted to break that up a little bit. It's too monotonous looking in here. You can do that. So, and texture goes on the edges of your shapes or at the edges of your shadows, like here. It doesn't go everywhere. Edges of your pillow poofs or edges of your shadows. Alrighty. And I'll leave it at that. No, I won't. Can't help myself. I want to make this drop shadow a little bit darker, so I'm going to just hatch over this a little bit, making this darker. Okay, I hope this was useful. And again, there is another demo on using traditional washes. I don't use the little dishes that I showed you earlier in the demo that's on YouTube, but it's very similar. So I think you can figure this out, and